Today, we have a slightly different approach on Swim Against the Tide. We meet Lucy Barber, who runs a strategic planning consultancy called Are Masterplan. She shares her experience in working with some of the most established household names as well as upcoming challenger brands in the market, helping both of them develop compelling and engaging strategies to meet their vision. She explains how sometimes a market leader can be hamstrung by fear and how the challenger could use bravery as a key driver for their growth. But she insists both organizations must understand the customer's needs to truly succeed. She finishes by sharing how she passionately believes that anyone can think strategically for the good of their organization, and finishes by telling her younger self to stop battering herself, her words not mine, in her early career journey. I hope you enjoy. Morning. We now welcome Lucy Barber from We Are Masterplan, or WAM, as I've been allowed to call it. Her new consultancy that she's launching as we speak. We'll find out a lot more about that today. Welcome, Lucy. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Steve. I'm delighted to be here.
Cool. I think what would be lovely is if you could give us a bit of your background of how you've got to launching this new business, and then people will understand that this is a slightly different episode, because you've always been on the side of helping and aiding brands to succeed rather than obviously running yourself, apart from your new business that you've got going now. So you can use this as part therapy to how you're going to run that successfully. But I think it's always good for people to know what your background is, what you've been doing, and then how you've ended up here. So they've got some context by which your advice and learned experience will resonate.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, so you're absolutely right. I spent almost 20 years on media agency side, which meant that I was helping challenger brands, major brands, global brands, local brands define their media strategy and execute that either in market or across multiple markets. And the reason that the brand has been conceived, We Are Masterplan, that is built on the lessons I've learned across my career, and really wanting to challenge the problem that I think that a lot of businesses have, which is they have a very clear business goal, and the strategy is the plan that should get them to that goal. But almost nobody in the business is taught how to talk the language of strategy. They're not given the tools and the techniques for strategic thinking. As a result, there's a statistic, I believe, which is 95% of employees within big businesses have no idea what their business strategy is, which means that, of course, then what happens is that people feel completely separate from being able to deliver their core business goal. They don't feel personally responsible for it. And that also means that they can't link their own performance to it, which means that there's therefore an enormous detachment of the core workforce from where the business wants to go. My business is conceived around seeing this problem occur and then building a training program that will help people not just learn a process for strategy, but absolutely understand the thinking techniques that will allow them to have better conversations, more agency over what their strategy looks like, and a much better ability to do things like reading data, deliver critical thinking, and so on, creating a far more strategic workforce, and I therefore believe a much more impactful business.
Okay, that's fascinating. And when in that context, because strategy is a word that's banded around everywhere, isn't it? In every area of every business. Are you talking about, say, the vision of the business, or you read a lot now about the why or the purpose of a business, or is it a little bit of everything?
Really good question. And the truth of the matter is it is defined differently by different people's agendas, to be perfectly frank. But in my opinion, the simplest iteration of what a strategy is the vision of what you talked about is the goal of where you want to be. The strategy is the plan to get you there. So it really is saying, if we're here now and in 5 years we want to be there, how might the strategy help us break that down into different time zones, 3 years hence, 1 year hence, 6 months hence? How can we help our teams understand how all of the work that they're doing will ladder up to that long-term vision and that business goal? The purpose is a really interesting question, because I think the purpose is how you operate all the time to get you to that goal. If you were a business which prides itself, for example, on being environmentally friendly, you may have a long-term vision around becoming carbon neutral by 2028, for example, but really your purpose should be embedded in everything you're doing. So it shouldn't just be your purpose is your vision, but your purpose is really about your kind of reason for being and how you operate all the time, and using that as a kind of boundary to improve constantly. But the strategy really simply is, if we want to be there and currently we're here, how do we get there? And what are all the different component parts that we need to look at and address? So our consumer profile, the category dynamics in which we're operating in, therefore how we relate to our competitors, what's changing or likely to change within culture, how can we be flexible to it, what does our company position mean at the moment, how are communications and media affecting the way we might get there, all of the things that ladder up to that. Now, my particular focus is predominantly marketing strategy, but that fits into the kind of 4 Ps, price, promotion, and so on. There is obviously a kind of bigger question to ask. And the point is that what I want people to understand is not just here's an end-to-end process, but much rather, how do I think really strategically? And by that, I mean, always be thinking about how one's personal contribution, your team contribution are laddering up towards a business goal and making it more effective.
Yeah, and I suppose that idea of where we're biased because we've come from the marketing sector, of course, and from the agency side, but the great businesses that we've ever worked with have always been marketing driven, and it has led their strategy because I think it's that articulation, that physical embodiment of what the business is about. And it's the one thing that pulls together those stories to allow us to then engage with our consumers and make them into customers and then long-term customers. I think you're right. It's that when they're driven that way, you can see why they're successful, can't you?
Absolutely. I went to see Rory Sutherland recently, as you and I talked about. And one of the things he said that I thought was so brilliant is that marketing is there as the growth engine. And without marketing, all business acumen is just financial planning. The big problem that lots of businesses have is that they assume that demand for their product or for their brand is consistent and therefore does not need an engine that's going to grow it. But you and I both know, of course, that simply isn't true. And that's why I'm so interested in things like category dynamics, competitors, and so on, is somebody can just come and steal your lunch. And if you're not actively marketing, creating your brand support, and so on, you will very likely see not just growth, but a decline in share within the category in which you operate. So a business being marketing led, there's a lot of conversation, I think, about marketing as a cost rather than investment. And I just think it's so wildly short-sighted to see it as such.
Yeah,
and
I mean, there's
support that.
Yeah, and there's nearly an arrogance there, isn't it? It's like, well, everybody knows my brand, they'll just choose it. And it's not, because if somebody else is being cooler and cleverer in their sector and suddenly catching the eye of a buyer, catching the eye of a market, then suddenly it's interesting, isn't it, of where I suppose does that side of the strategy allow people to keep on message, if that makes sense? Because I think you can get lazy, can't you? You can do some work and think, right, solved it, it's all done. We're now number one, absolutely fine.
Very definitely. Paul Dyson, who is absolutely brilliant and looks at sort of what are the different factors that affect marketing performance and things like return on investment, will show that the size of a brand is always kind of the biggest accumulator factor. It's always the thing that will have the greatest effect on the impact of your marketing or the impact of your market share. So if you do have a big brand, yes, there's almost an arrogance that's bought with that by going, well, because my brand is already so big, I know that has a really positive accumulator factor on anything that I do. But we do and have seen major brands decline and hugely popular challenger brands rise through the ranks by looking not just at where the product gap in the market is, but where the marketing gap in the market is. Who am I speaking to? Do I go direct to consumer? Is there a particular demographic that's been wildly underserved? I, at the moment, for example, have been banging the drum with lots of brands about speaking, probably selfishly, to middle-aged and older women, a demographic with whom we know there is an inordinately high level of buying power. Women, I think, over the age of 50 have 250% more buying power than women under the age of 30. And yet most brands confuse youth with aspiration. So they put younger women into adverts and kind of demonstrate their marketing as if it is driven towards young women. But it is so short-sighted in terms of actually, if you make a brand that is clearly driven at a specific target audience, where you know that they are being underserved and they have a far higher level of disposable income, you are going to be able to push against some of the biggest brands in the market. So it's really interesting to see how that can change fortunes.
A lot of your background obviously has been around digital media. Do you think that's a result of maybe the laziness of some brands and some agencies, where it's much easier to hit that under 30s market through social channels and just go, oh, we'll just put a post out, we'll just put some stuff out. So it makes the brand self-fulfilled by it's not having an ambition to focus. It's the same thing, isn't it? Who are we going after and where are we going to succeed?
Possibly. I think it's bigger than that. I do think that there is something to be said for... So I went to a conference recently, which was all about going direct to consumer, and they kind of all very much worship at the fountain of social media. And I would say that, I mean, the reality is all demographics exist on social media now. So you're just as likely to hit, an older person as you are a younger person. But I do think there is something to be said for brands that have built themselves on, kind of TikTok influencer success, and people look at that, observe it and want to copy it. And actually, there's nothing wrong with that. I guess what I would say is that actually what I'm interested in is pushing against some of the more societal norms that we have absorbed into marketing. As I say, youth equals aspiration, which is just a complete misnomer. I've actually had an argument with a client about whether or not Maggie Smith is aspirational. My belief is, of course, she is. I mean, she's just bloody wonderful.
Did you win?
Yeah. Oh, God, of course I won.
Why am I surprised?
That's coming out next year, which will be based exactly on this proposition. But I think it's more about seeing where the opportunity for your marketing exists. So, as I say, looking at culture, consumer, category, we kind of broadly call it the 4 Cs, although I think there's slightly more to it than that. And saying, not only do I have a product that can suit that specific part of the category or demographic, but I can really do some interesting, exciting challenger marketing work there, which will really help me steal some share.
And just going back to what we spoke about earlier, are there any sort of trends or sort of analogies that you've seen with the different types of brands you've worked with, when you've maybe worked with a market leader versus a challenger and a not quite a startup? Because I'm sure some of the businesses that you work with had to be bigger than that. But are there any trends that you can draw from that? Any lessons that we can share on that side of it? Fear.
Fear is a really interesting one. The bigger the brand, the more afraid they are. Without naming names, one of the biggest luxury brands in the world has their staff, that would be agency staff as well as their direct employees, effectively sign a contract that says that they recognise that they are a custodian of the brand and that they are there to protect the brand for its future progress and development, across the generations. Now, for that brand specifically, I think one could argue that has earned them a level of success, and I kind of love it. But that really is at the sharp end of what I think is represented about the difference, is that the bigger the brand, the more fear that they tend to have, because if they are a big established brand, it tends to be that they have big established norms. And if you play by the norms and you do what is expected, it's far less likely, if something goes wrong or doesn't perform as one would have wanted, that anybody can point to you and say, you told us to try this and that has failed. The smaller, more challenger brands have a much braver culture in general. I don't think that's true of all of them. I worked with one financial client brand. I'd actually almost like to name check her. I might tell you afterwards and you can put a tag in for her, because she's absolutely brilliant. This is a very big compliment. But it's a huge financial brand name, but they recognise that they have innovative technological product and therefore want to have innovative tech-led marketing as well. So they recognise that the medium needs to follow the message. And so there are definitely brands operating in that space. But I think with challenger brands, where you feel that you've got less to lose, you can try more things. And I think what's interesting is I use the word failure, but actually there's no such thing as failure. It's really just lessons learned. So you try something, you go down a path, it doesn't work. As long as not too much revenue has been sacrificed at that position, what it will tell you, I think, will be as informative of where you go next as if you had wildly succeeded. But actually testing and testing and testing has statistically been proven to lead to overall better results. So I would say it's the bravery of challenger brands that I love, because they're much less likely for somebody to point at them and said, I can't believe that TV campaign that you booked has failed on our behalf and now you're going to get fired, which is, I would say, more of a prevalent culture in some of the big brands.
Yeah, because like I say, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it, that fear? But that custodian thing's it creates a fear
Yeah.
if you get it wrong, doesn't it? Rather than the general fear. There's a story, isn't it, that's how the All Blacks, a rugby team, when you get given your shirts, if you get selected for them, they basically say, it's your turn to look after this shirt till you pass it on to the next one. And it creates, it's two ways, isn't it? You're either going to go, I'm stepping up, I've got my chance.
Yeah.
Or you're going to just get crushed and disappear and go, it's too big for me. Yeah.
And I suppose in that case, they must know beforehand, right? Like they won't give them the shirt without determining whether or not that's going to provoke pride or fear. But exactly that. And I think in the specific case I referenced, because they are, sort of pretty well market leading, I think in their case, it definitely invokes a sense of pride and a desire to deliver the heritage and equity of that specific brand. But it's always a brand, I think, as I say, that represents the sharp end of what big brands can get into, which is, we've always done this, so we'll always do this. And that will not, in most cases, lead to growth.
And that, as you say, with the instant culture that we have in every platform now, you get to that, it's not quite burnout, but you get to that position much quicker than you ever would before if it was through traditional media in the past. It's just that makes you think. So I love the idea that there's less fear and there's more bravery, because they're potentially perceiving that they've got less to lose, although they haven't, because they're still employing people, they're still trying to make a living. But it's just that different edge. But I suppose when you're advising businesses or when you're working and developing these strategies, how do they overcome that potentially the market leaders got 10 times the media budget and 10 times the firepower? What are you seeing in there that they're doing differently to counter that?
Well, first of all, most of the time they can't. Like that's the pragmatic, I think, approach to take, which is you need to think, as I say, about your 5-year goal and then rein it back into where are you going to go next. So wanting to kind of come out and say, we're going to overtake the market leader straight away. There are, of course, the Silicon Valley unicorns, wherein the market value of that particular product demonstrates that supposedly they've got to that point already. It's extremely and vanishingly rare. And I think setting that expectation amongst certain businesses actually causes more harm than good, because it makes everybody feel under such a level of pressure that it will palpably never be delivered. And then everybody will feel that they have done a bad job. And that's just dreadful morale.
Yeah.
Instead, what I see is clever challenger brands that I've worked with, thinking about where they get to and who they're going to leapfrog next. So if their big behemoth, giant is up here, where in the category do they sit? Whose market share are they coming for next? Be that their specific audience, be that their product spacing, be that their position in retail. Where are the spaces and places that they can start to stake more of a claim? Position in retail is a really interesting one, I think. I spoke about things like going direct to consumer. That has been something which we've definitely seen certain challenger brands delivered very well in recent times, to be able to say, I'm going to circumnavigate all of the administrative problems of going to kind of big retail, bricks and so on.
And that distribution side that can be an absolute nightmare and take ages, can't it? Yeah,
exactly. And serve the consumer directly. But all that being said, I actually think that there's a lot more opportunity to be done by working with the likes of Tesco, who I still think are something like 30% of total grocery in the UK. If you have an FMCG product or any product that might appear on the shelf of a big supermarket, I think actually thinking, yes, here are the ways in which I can approach this through marketing, but it has to be married with, where am I finding opportunity to steal some share when I go to the shelf of my local supermarket? What does it look like? Who stands out? Who doesn't stand out? That's the question who is not standing out on that shelf? Who's maybe second from bottom, just one above the own brand product that they don't really want people to buy? Who's sitting there? Who do you look at last? Because that is a really interesting proposition, because they could be killing it in marketing, but something's wrong with their retail. So that's the area to challenge them on. Or think about routes into the category that other people haven't considered. I have this obsession with magnums cracking. It's really weird.
Oh, I didn't, the chocolate breaking off when you're eating.
Yeah, there's noise. No, specifically the noise.
Oh, the noise.
So
Interesting.
all of the marketing for Magnum talks about crack, and
Crunches,
even
yeah.
when they created the tubs, they had the chocolate top crack. Now, there's something very delicious about that says, look how thick the chocolate is. Look, you get a big disc of chocolate on top of the ice cream. How delicious and wonderful. But actually, it's a genius piece of marketing that challenges a problem that everybody else in the category, i.e. ice cream, has, which is frozen food does not smell. So when you are advertising all other foodstuffs, you can usually rely on there being a kind of sensorial connection in the eye of the consumer. So the perfect iteration of this is bacon. If I show you a picture of bacon, some part of you will start to smell it. If like a sizzling bacon, even just talking about it,
You've
a
just
little
got
bit
that
of you
smoked. Yeah.
the smell of the bacon. Frozen food does not smell. So the freezer aisle is unpleasant to walk down in the supermarket because it's cold. It looks really dull because everything is behind thick glass doors, or it's, down in the freezer
down
chest.
in deeps, yeah.
And you cannot provoke a sort of easy sensorial response in the mind of the consumer when you show them the advert. So, right, well, we'll put it in the ears then. We'll give them the crack. And every time someone hears the Magnum crack, they'll think, oh, delicious thick chocolate ice cream. Perfect iteration of being able to say, where can I go into a territory or take a different approach that challenges the category norms and therefore gets me above my competitors? That's one of the things I'm really obsessed with.
Brilliant. Because it's interesting, isn't it? It's how specifically the idea of how those brands sort of have to grow up, because there's been quite a few cases recently of brands building on social alone initially. So like Vodka's a good example, isn't it? The idea of where they build this groundswell, but it's very interesting to actually be successful. They have to flip to the traditional distribution model, but it's quite a cool way of doing it when you're going to the buyer. We'll use Tesco as our example, as our shorthand for the retailer. But if you're saying to me, I've got 500,000 people who are engaging with my brand and know about my brand, they just want to be able to buy it easier because it's too much. Because as consumers, we're all a bit lazy, aren't we? We all go, oh yeah, I'll buy it direct. Oh, can't be bothered.
No, they don't want to.
Whereas if you go, I've seen that. Yeah, I saw a really cool post, or so-and-so was drinking it, or whatever. And are you seeing that more and more now, where brands are sort of getting to a level and going, right, I exist and I've got awareness, especially in my core group. How do I then monetize that and the strategy to do that?
1000%. Because you have it nailed, which is, I would like to buy it, but I don't want to sign up for yet another email chain or put my details into a FAT, and do I really trust this website? And also, you have to be also really mindful of the category in which you operate. If people love to laud the Dollar Shave Club, but actually people need razors on subscription. So creating a subscription model around that, or HelloFresh.
That beats the laziness, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Well,
so
if you can get them to sign up, then you've got them, haven't you?
You're swapping one laziness for another, because what you're saying is now you don't have to go and remember to get razors or put them on the shopping list. So there are certain products that absolutely lend themselves to a subscription model, or there are certain products that are sort of that mid-high ticket, not so expensive that you'd be prepared to buy it. Some people absolutely do buy cars online. It's very much a proven product, but a lot of people still like to go and kind of feel and see and touch the product first. So there's a sort of mid-tier of, it's expensive enough where I'm prepared to buy it online and have it delivered, and it's a one-off purchase, and if there's a problem, I'll return it. But lots and lots and lots of products are things that we want to buy semi-regularly, but not necessarily on subscription. And one of the best examples, I'd say, of exactly what you've talked about, Steve, which is, hello, I exist, now can you sell my product in store, is one of the influencer-led products, which is Deliciously Ella from a few years ago. She started creating all these sort of vegan recipes and talking about, she was very much, I think, at the forefront of what we saw for a number of years, which was kind of clean living. Now, you can have your thoughts on that particular movement and whatever you feel on that, be as it may. But I think what's really fascinating was that she developed the recipes, developed her profile, then created product, and then that product went very quickly into retail for exactly the reasons you've been talking about, which is I have a huge base of people who would love to be able to eat my, kind of power bars and balls and treats and snacks and things. Can you please put them in store? And actually, can you give me premium spacing? I remember very quickly she was at Till, which is obviously kind of one of the best impulse places. Now, unless you're absolutely committed to eating power bars every single day, you're probably not buying those on subscription. And you're certainly not, I expect, going to buy like a pack of 40 from Amazon unless, again, you're really into the product. But if you just feel like saying to yourself, I feel a bit too guilty to have a Snickers today, like that's the way in which you'll probably be purchasing. So I think there is so much opportunity for brands to follow that model. And it doesn't just need to be influencer led. There are lots of ways, I think, in which you can build the brand and then go to a retailer and say, now take me really seriously.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the guests we've had on in a former life was working with Grenade on obviously their protein bars. And he said one of the areas that unlocked the success of the brand was that obviously they got the product right. They made it tasty, that you're allowed to enjoy it. But he said it was positioning. And if you remember, it suddenly started appearing at Tills and you're like, I'd rather than have a Snickers, I'll do myself a bit of good, even if it was just to walk home from the bus.
Protein, lovely.
but I suppose it is, isn't it? And it's to go back to that point we talked about in terms of not having the firepower financially. You've got to be smart. Do you think that nearly makes it more fun because you've got to be different? You've got to be creative. You can't do the lazy journey.
Well, I would say, just carefully, the word lazy is not one I would use.
Sorry.
Brand. Just
the well-worn path, should we say? Yeah, the stereotypical path. Yeah.
I think there's sort of, the safer options where you sort of, that if you put X in, you can get Y out. Fun is an interesting concept because I would say that what I think runs hand in hand with being what I talked about earlier, which is brave, is also probably less of the line of credit. So whilst I think you can be brave, you also are taking, I said you don't have as much to lose. Yes, in terms of your brand equity, you probably do have financially more of a risk to take because you don't necessarily have the coffers to rely on and say, we'll try this at such a scale as to risk, large portions of the business. So I would say, hate the phrase calculated risk, but obviously I think there needs to be a very clear approach to what is it that we're actually trying to ask ourselves? Like, what do we want to learn? What are the hypotheses that we have that we can work with? And I think fun within that comes into, okay, how can we make ourselves more playful? If brand in the world I have ever worked with talks to me about wanting to be more responsive to culture. And the reality is you just need to know where you think your space in culture is. Don't just run around following things like, Brat Summer and Barbie Pink and things, unless you actually think that there is a reason for your brands to play in that space.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, that's the first question to ask yourselves. So I think the fun comes from, in my perspective, really establishing, well, who do we want to be as a brand? Like, what do we want to stand for? When we think about the different category positionings, the cultural opportunity, the consumer that we want to speak to, how are we showing up for them? Like, I saw brilliant CSO Steve Walls talking recently on LinkedIn about being more intimate, finding moments of being able to be more closely connected with people, and that not just being about sort of physical proximity. If he hears this, he'll probably think I'm completely misrepresenting what he said. But I think really understanding the consumer and their desires and needs, not from that kind of old-fashioned pragmatic, like the demographic, the walk to work, the commute, the kind of very trite, I think, day in the life approach, but much more like, well, how can we show up and give you something that's going to be really useful and lovely and helpful and just make you feel like you've been seen or heard in a way that is going to help you feel that we're something that is resonates with you and makes sense for you.
That relevance to the consumer, isn't it? That you're making a bit of a difference with them. Yeah.
Relevance, yes, but I think also just kind of I love this use of the word intimacy because I think it's slightly deeper than relevance. Because I could have a product that I'll say, Steve, this is really relevant to your life, but you might be like, yeah, but my dad used to use this.
Yeah.
The competitor program, the product that you're already using could be something that has an emotional resonance to you. So I think resonance is probably the bit that I think is probably that goes with it. Which is understanding, okay, why are you choosing what you're already choosing, or why are you not choosing us? How do we really dig into that more psychologically?
Okay, that's interesting. So going back to the work you do in helping them define and develop a strategy to execute their vision and their wishes, there's just that point you said there. Do you think that aids with their then decision making? I mean, I've talked a lot on the other podcasts where a lot of guys have talked about a gut feeling, and they get a gut and they just sort of know the answer. But when you dig into that, what seems to be is because they've both got experience of making the wrong decision as well, but also they just go, no, because I'm very clear about what I'm trying to do, and that feels right. Do you think that you're giving them a bit of a framework to help decision making, so you just go, I shouldn't be there, but I should be there?
That's a really good question. I believe in gut feeling. I believe in thinking about things subjectively, but I don't believe in ending the conversation there. So what I mean is gut feeling is usually, as you say, tapping into something which is, yes, that feels true. A lot of people talk about the misappropriation, I think, of the word insight. I think that actually a lot of the time what people mean by proper insight is actually like epiphanies. And I think most of us have about 5 of them in our career.
Yeah.
When you see something and you go, oh my gosh, that is going to fundamentally change the approach of the brand. I think most of the time it's just interesting things that we've observed, that where there is a feeling that actually there's something behind it. But what I am interested in doing is, as I said before, I think asking myself, why? Why does that have a feeling? What is it that seems to be telling me? What is it that I'm responding to? And therefore, either what do I think that is going to solve, or what question do I think I need to ask? And I would say the second bit of that is not letting data kill the process, but certainly being really open to data proving you wrong. So you could have a gut feeling about something, but it could just be you. And I think that one of the things I find, now I shall definitely not mention who the client was, but I saw a piece of work recently from a creative agency, and the work was brilliant. And it was a product that is really specifically, and I rarely say this, but it really is specifically designed for women or non-binary people who would be wearing and using that particular product.
Okay.
So anybody in the femme space would be using this product. And all of the women on the call looked at the piece of copy and said, my God, that is brilliant. What a way to approach that particular product. Backed up by System 1. They put it through System 1, so the kind of creative data approach appraisal, and had got a score, I think, of 4.5 out of 5.
So right up there, yeah.
Rarely seen such a good score. So there was a group of people in the room who were saying, this work is utterly brilliant.
Love it, yeah.
And a hugely quantitative piece of data that was saying, yes, you're right. And then, and I'm so sorry, Steve, because this is not a masculine bashing thing, but there was a specifically male client on the thing who said the lines of, the thing is, I don't think that product would make a man want to speak to that woman, and I don't think a woman would really want to wear that product. And we all
I've got, just so everybody can see, if they listen to this, I've got a pink shirt on, so it's not me.
Well, pink shirt, no, you could be in absolutely anything, but I think what I would hope is that you would take the data and the word of the people whom the product was designed. Yeah. So I think that the data is there to prove or disprove, and disprove is the thing that I think one needs to be really, really open to. And I've certainly had many moments I've been wrong in my career, and been really pleased to kind of go, okay, but the reason that I thought this initially was telling me this. So whilst I was wrong, what can I learn from having got to it like that? So I think it's really critical. Have a gut feeling, but interrogate it and prove or disprove it with data, and look at other data sources as well. You know, sometimes you can have a gut feeling about something that you think is coming, so you won't have a wealth of econometrics, media mix modeling, or, you know, really kind of long lead data that will say, yes, you're right, or no, you're wrong. What you might have is, if you'd been at the beginning of the kind of clean eating movement and kind of wellness trend, is noticing how many more people were going to the gym in the morning. Yeah. How many more people were saying they didn't seem to be drinking as much. How many more health food or juice bars were opening in places like, you know, New York and LA. You know, look at other pieces of data and start to track footfall to particular parts of big stores, are more people going and looking at veggies and juice. So there are definitely always, I think, other ways in which you can start to quantify your hypothesis.
Yeah, because people will behave and action before they actually reflect and realize what they're doing. So if they get asked that, they go, I'm not doing that, but they actually are. They're in that aisle of the supermarket, or they're in that area of town. It's a bit like the Malcolm Gladwell thing, isn't it, of how that tipping point occurs. Can you try and spot the tipping point before it does?
Yeah. Well,
and then we'd all retire.
Exactly. But indeed, actually, also you can go and ask people. I mean, you have a product which specifically allows you to go and ask people what their opinions are. And if you can start to get that really early data and ask questions in the right way that will allow you to be disproved, that is the bit. Is not asking leading questions that will only ever prove you right.
They said I was right. Yeah,
exactly.
I think that's what brands are realizing, is that the answers do lie in their customers, and if they can find a way to have a dialogue and an open conversation, it's not like cheating. It's like, well, if the person, back to your example, if the person's saying, I'd really like to see this on your shelves, or I'd really like you to develop this version of this product, well, it doesn't take long to just dig into that and go, there's something here, and then we can grow through with it. And it's interesting. You can see it's a movement that's happening with brands. I mean, Morrison's did that. Look, you could argue it's a little bit PR-y, but did that thing of inviting customers to some of their management meetings. Again, you could accuse them being a gimmick, but they're still doing it. But that's the start of it, isn't it? Get somebody in the room, talk to them. What did you do? What are the pressures?
I don't care. Please go and ask people, and also ask people who aren't your customers. That's the really big thing, because if you want growth, you've got to speak to people who aren't buying from you and see why they're not buying from you. You know, is your positioning wrong? Is your product wrong? Is there something that they're not enjoying about your pricing? Is there an issue with the supply chain? Is there, there's all sorts of things that you can learn if you're prepared to hear criticism. If you want,
and that's it.
That.
Yeah, because there's no way you've got it right all the time, and I think you referenced that lifestyles product. That was the reason we developed it, was also the speed element of it, because the markets are galloping at the moment, and sometimes traditional research or insight will mean you get the answer, but they've already gone off to the left now or to the right. And if we can get that quickly, and brands can have, and I suppose that maybe is something that can play towards, back to what you're saying about the challenger brand, that could be slightly more fleet of foot than maybe the big behemoth in charge of the market. That's where they can suddenly whiz up the inside, and it's like, where have you come from? Because you've just got that little bit.
And the challenger brands should be mindful of the fact that they've done such a good job of demonstrating how to be fleet of foot. Beyond no illusion that the big brands are coming for that. Some of them already are. I mean, I referenced kind of Brat Summer earlier, and some of the other things that were done around some of the kind of big trendy movements which are actually, I think it's Phil Rowley, who's a brilliant person who looks at innovation, and he talks about it actually being more fad than trend. A trend is something that establishes itself and sets in as a kind of consumer behaviour, whereas a fad is something which is so quick that if you take the time to assess the data to determine whether or not you should follow it, it's already passed and you've missed the moment.
Sorry, bye.
Yeah, exactly. But, big brands have been creating opportunities where they can scale, albeit maybe just a single static post, but just something that will be a funny or punchy response to, we saw how many brands came out with very demure, very mindful, and the speed at which they moved meant that it was either wildly successful or kind of.
But it was that thing that they felt they had to be in the conversation, didn't they? And to make sure their brand's there. Yeah.
And actually, did they? It's what I said before, which is, do you feel that your position in market gives you not the right to play, because I think
maybe,
right,
is it?
but maybe, but just the cultural relevance to that particular place.
It's like Dad's just come in the room and said something really inappropriate in front of my friends, which I'm very, very good at. Yeah, which I'm.
I kind of love a bit of cringe, if I'm being perfectly frank.
Yeah, it's like that.
Nice to being cheesy and uncool. But don't try and be a cool brand if you're then going to be cringe. Just, if you are a cheesy brand, then you can go for it. It's all good.
Cheese, absolutely. So look, it'd be brilliant to just move on to a bit like what your next adventure is in terms of launching the We Are Masterplan, the WAM brand. You've worked for some amazing companies. I mean, you've worked with some amazing brands. It's quite good, because a lot of people will be out there thinking about launching their own thing. What's been the trigger for you to go, you know what, I'm going to have a go at this. I'm going to launch this, and have this midlife crisis to go, yeah, let's do it.
Don't mention the midlife crisis.
Well, I've had about 3. Don't worry, you're fine.
I'm 40 this year. That was
Yeah.
me. Oh dear. No, I've built myself the course I wish had always existed.
Got you.
So I have built a program that unpacks all the things I felt deeply insecure about as a strategist, and that I wish I'd known before I officially became a strategist, so that I could have much more impactful conversations about my position within the business, so that I could leverage them when I came up to performance reviews, so that I could create much more effective work with my team. And that I wish my team had also had the training in, so that we could work together much more cohesively. One of the things I was always accused of in pitches, which is kind of moving faster than the room, because I have a kind of natural aptitude for putting ideas together, but I hasten to add, I'm dreadful at things like finishing my timesheets. So I'm not trying to self-aggrandize.
Well, we're all different, are we? That's why we're a team. You need all the skills in the team. Yeah.
But, you know, for me, it was always really clear how one idea and another idea kind of get together and build something much more interesting, and what the implications of that might be. But actually, had I had a really common language where everybody in the room knew much more about, oh, okay, well, you're talking about this and this, and the pattern that you're seeing between the two is this, or the odd one out, the odd thing in the data that you're looking at is that. We'd have all been trained much more effectively in being able to read those patterns and data challenges. We'd have more of a language of being able to do what I called about critical thinking, which is saying, this seems to be true, but when I look at it more closely, what are the actual implications of that? What's the client really asking for? What do they want? And just a much more cohesive framework for being able to discuss the different steps along which the process and the strategy were delivered. So it's not just a course that I wish that I had had. It's a course I wish everybody I've worked with had had.
Yeah.
So that we can say, as I say, here is the goal. Now, the goal might be long-term business goal of the agency, of the brand, but it could also be, I've just mentioned pitching. We want to win this pitch. Okay, we need to rapidly move through a strategy to get there. Now, there are some bits of strategy training on the market already, but I would say a lot of them focus on things like templates and tools. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of what we need is to be able to say strategy isn't instinct, it is process and practice. And I absolutely believe in that. But I think that most strategy tools and templates should be like Lego bricks. They should be homogenous. There should be a uniform set of industry standard. I talked about the 4 C's, for example, get to, buy, benefits ladders. You will see this crop up in all strategy training. And I think that's a good thing, because what I want is for those bricks to look the same as my partner's bricks or my client's bricks or a media owner's bricks, so that we can all put our templates together and say, everybody's moving through the same process in the same way. Brilliant. What I'm really interested in teaching people is how to think much more effectively. So yes, my strategy training will give you all of the templates that you need and a process for being able to deliver strategy, and it will teach you that end to end. What I will also teach you is how to make it much, much better in the output. Because if I were to give most people a set of Lego bricks and go and build me a car, what they'd probably come back with is a box on wheels, not a real car. It's a level of imagination. If I give a bunch of bricks to a Lego master builder, somebody who was trained in the skill of building these things, they will come back with an F1 replica. So both are cars, only one works. That's the difference I'm interested in. It's not doing strategy, it's thinking strategically. Now, I talked about how I have an aptitude for putting ideas together. So one could infer from that, well, does that mean that one can actually learn this, or do you have to somehow be born with it? No, you do not. That is an absolute fallacy that I think is a real problem within our industry, which is that somehow strategists are ordained by some god with the ability to just do strategy. I think what that causes is strategists to feel deeply insecure because they haven't been trained on the difference between paint by numbers strategy and good strategy. And it causes everybody else to feel that they don't have the chance to speak up and think strategically.
Yeah, it's like, oh, they'll come up with the idea, I'll just sit back and wait. And yeah, you just get, yeah.
I have no interest in that whatsoever. And I think when you look at ways in which we learn pattern recognition, critical thinking, all elements that I believe are crucial to thinking strategically, we used to learn for 11 plus, like that was verbal or non-verbal reasoning. Wasn't very fun. I think that you can do it in a
we didn't
mature
understand it then either, did we?
But it's also, I spoke to a couple of people who trained for Only Connect. You know, it's a program that, again, that some people say I can just do it or I can't just do it. But the contestants will tell you, no, we practiced, we got better. Like we saw a palpable improvement in how we were able to do the different tasks within that show. So what I have taken a lot of time doing is breaking down, these are the rudiments and tools that you need to do strategy, but these are the ways in which I can improve your thinking. And it's becoming, I've become really obsessed with around neuroplasticity and just making ourselves better at thinking. So I believe everybody needs it to get better at business, and I believe everybody can get better at it.
Brilliant. I mean, it does sound fascinating because you're right. It's what happens is people then tend to behave like their titles and roles and don't. A good idea, as we know from our collective experience, come from anywhere and from anybody. And so part of that, I'm assuming, is that you create an environment where ideas can be shared and can be brought to the fore under a structure that is with a vision. But yeah, I think that's great.
And not just the ideas coming forward, but being critiqued. That's the bit I'm really interested in. You know, that yes, we absolutely should give, you know, create a culture, I suppose, where everybody has the opportunity to put forward their ideas. But what we need is techniques for improving them, critiquing them, asking questions about how they will actually get us to our ultimate goal. Because sometimes something can seem really sexy, but when you assess it versus where you're trying to go, you might think, okay, well, is there a real line between those two things that we have really created? And, you know, I want everybody in the team to feel confident in having strategic conversations and challenging strategists. That's a big thing. I want everybody to be able to say, no, I'm sorry, you're not talking any sense. And this is why.
If you've got a little secret toolkit that allows you to ask that question, you're right, isn't it? Because it is sometimes I bet we've all done it where you start on an idea and it gets like a train, it runs and runs and runs, and you nearly forget, and you go, oh, it doesn't really work, or it just falls down here. And you've got to have a team that can go to think better to your angle.
And it's, for me, it's the point is it shouldn't be secret. It should be absolutely. So what I teach is, it's 4 different modules, the program that I teach. And the first is, I call it everything you need to know about strategy planning, which is the process end to end. Yeah. So it's what I said at the beginning.
Because you do need a structure. People like to feel there's a framework in place to a degree, isn't there?
I think it's crucial. It's part of the practice. Now, I don't think that people need to be wedded to templates. And what I cannot bear is when I see people always presenting back in templates. You know, this kind of concept of, I've filled out the 4 C's, so now I need to present them back to the client as the 4 C's. No. You need to think about the story for the client. They should be a framework for you to get the right output from the research or to do the right research, not to tell the ultimate story. So I think that the first part is absolutely crucial. Here's everything you need to know about the Lego bricks. Here's all the tools you need and the process. The second module is no marketing theory at all. It's all neuroplasticity and thinking. So it's all puzzles and games and fun and challenges and riddles and things that some people will find really lovely. And what I try to make sure is I've thought about lots of different neurodiversities. So some of the puzzles will really lend themselves to certain types of sort of typical neurodiverse brains, others to others. So some you will find challenging and useful, some you will find, you know, simple and be able to implement them straight away. What I want to see is that people start to take this as practice and use this to continually improve the way that they're delivering their strategic thinking. Then the third module is applying that in practice. So you and I and Steve were old enough to remember the Karate Kid and the wax on, wax off, you know, doing a thing, not really necessarily understanding why you're doing a thing, and then applying it to the actual practice. So module 2 is all puzzles and games and how to improve the way you think. Module 3 is, okay, here are some pieces of data that I've taken from, you know, actual marketing practice. What do you now ask, know, observe, think is interesting about all of this that gets you to a far more interesting strategic point of view on this brief? Where are you going? Who are you speaking to? What would you do? What would you observe? And then module 4 is, here's a real brief, which could be a brief that if you're a team of people, sales team, marketing team,
They could
whatever.
bring them along with them.
Yeah, you can bring that to me and I will work on that and help you deliver it collaboratively. Or if it was I also can have individuals sign up for a cohort and work with other people. I will bring a real brief that I've worked on and say, let's go at it and see what we get to. So starts with the process, focuses on the thinking, delivers a payoff at the end.
I love it. I love it. And it's interesting, just to summarize for anybody, whatever they think they're doing, what you've got there is obviously a passion. You've got an absolute focus as to what you do. And this is what we see with successful brands is they know who they are and what they're trying to achieve. And I think the energy that you're going to bring will mean that will be a runaway success. It sounds fabulous.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fingers crossed.
keep everything crossed. But I think, but it is, isn't it? It's about knowing. I mean, there's a Japanese model, is it Ikigai? I never know whether I say it correctly. And it sounds like you personally have landed on that. You've got something, you obviously know what you're doing. I've looked at your CV. You've got all the justification for the experience. You're obviously very passionate about it. The world definitely needs it. In our market, it needs that. It needs that because as the world spins and more comes in and there's more options and more competition and potentially easier routes into market. We do a lot in the alcohol sector, and somebody could come up with a cool beer next week that could take on one of the established brands and they can win. It's really exciting, but it's also like, how does the established brand deal with these upstarts, these fashion that probably won't be there in a few years?
Yeah.
And I think that idea is a really interesting thing, that it suddenly won't feel like going to work. It'll feel like you're building something. Because I think that's always clear. If you start a business, you've got to be clear why, not just like, I think I'll do an agency tomorrow. It's like, yeah, but why should someone choose you? What is it that you...
those people have existed. We don't know that's happened.
A couple of times. I think I'll just do it. But it is, and Simon Sinek talks about purpose and why. But they are good models to be. But I think people might be able to get their heads around some of that. But this idea that you can really, really be clear of what you're trying to achieve and what you're solving in the market, because it's interesting. That's how you started. I don't know whether you did that on purpose or you were all trained now, but when you started to explain to me what you're doing, you actually explained the problem you were solving. And loads of agencies forget that. They talk about, we can do some social media, we could buy some media, we could do this and that. And they forget what they're doing and what they're solving for their client first and primarily, because then you start the relationship on the right lines. You might end up doing some social media or buying some media, but it's from a plan and a strategy.
Yeah, agreed.
So I normally ask the question towards the end now, because we've been, as usual, talking far too long. I'd normally sort of say, what advice would you have given to your younger self? So what advice are you giving to yourself now as you start this journey? Have you had this out of body experience where you're going, right, Lucy, stick to this, don't come off the path?
It's a great question that I have been actually mulling over a lot. Giving advice to my younger self, I would say, don't change anything. Just calm down a bit and know that it will work out all right. I put so much pressure on myself in the first few years. But I also moved at a real pace. I think I was promoted about every 18 months across 15 years or something. So it worked. It was just exhausting. So I think that what I'm telling myself now is not success at any cost. So it's a conversation I have a lot with my actual partner, which is, if that will afford you this, what will it cost you? And weighing up the balance of those things. So I passionately and deeply believe you're absolutely right that the business I've created solves a problem that not only I have faced, but I've seen prevalent through all of the brands and all of the companies I've worked with and for. And so I want to bring it to the market because I think it will be helpful. And I think that not only will it help businesses improve what they do, I really believe in its ability to help individuals shine in their performance and to have more diverse people find strategy. But my advice to myself is, don't batter at it in the way that you did when you were 23 and 24. Just give yourself some grace and try and create the balance that you would advise that most brands would find for themselves.
Brilliant. I love that. I can tell you've been hanging around your Yorkshire family too much with that word of battering, because it is just, but it's a lovely, isn't it? It's what it is. Oh, Lucy, look, thank you so much for your time. That's been absolutely fascinating. I've enjoyed every minute of it. And
Me too.
Best of luck with the launch. We'll all watch on with great interest. Thank you.
WeAreMasterplan.com.
There you go.
Wonderful.
Bit of advertising. I won't charge you for that.
Thanks,
Thank
mate. I'll
you.
speak to you soon. Cheers, Steve.